Okay, so Will asked me to read another story. We'll tell another story. This is one. It's about a woman called Abby who lives alone in a little house, and something strange is growing in the garden. This story called Lammy. It was in the corner by the big bare rhododendron. Abby enjoyed the little changes that came and went, and yet she hadn't spotted this one. A small white dome protruding an inch or two through the fallen leaves. "Hello, you," she said, leaning forward on the folding chair, hugging her hot chocolate. The garden behind the little box house was a rough rectangle of lawn, bordered by bushes and the broad trees leaning over the fence. Beyond the impenetrable tangle covering the back lay a stretch of wild land and the curtain of the woods. "Nothing will be getting through that," the letting agent had said, gingerly fingering the thorns, "and it's all mud and trees on the other side. What could get through that, I don't know. Pretty safe and cosy here, all right." Abby agreed. Even on the coldest days, she sat bundled up in her favourite dressing gown with a flask and a paperback. She tended to the garden only to the extent that would keep her landlady happy. In Abby's scruffy arbour, what would grow, would grow. The white dome glistened. A giant puffball, was that the name? A fungus of some kind, anyhow. She tucked her paperback inside her dressing gown next to the hot water bottle and shivered. She would say her proper hello in the morning. Pausing to pick a few leaves off the surface of the bird bath, Abby said good-night to the garden and went to bed. The following day she worked at her desk in her bobble hat and second favourite dressing gown. The company had switched to home working 2 years ago. They had all made pledges to keep in touch, but the farewell drinks never happened. Abby sold her car. Crunching dripping toast, she clicked and tapped and made 3 calls, leaving 3 identical messages. An email from her boss reminded her that she had not yet booked any time off. Through the window, the trees were still. The garden was quiet and pensive, as if keeping a secret. Beyond lay the woods. Rising halfway from her chair, Abby peered over the sill. The dome was visible, perhaps a little larger than before. Working through lunch as usual, she finished early and went down to make dinner. This way she could park herself outside and enjoy what remained of the light. The leaf fall would have to be tidied up. The letting agent was due the next day for the annual inspection. "Sorry about this," she said, dragging the rake. When the inspection was complete, she would put them all back again. At the corner, by the rhododendron, she stopped working and stood over her new arrival. It was milk white and oval, narrowing slightly at one end. Playfully she nudged it with her shoe, expecting the spongy give of a mushroom. Instead, it was hard. She crouched down and prodded it, then ran her finger along the rigid surface. Nothing stony could sprout from the earth like this. Had it been lobbed over the fence? That would have been quite a determined throw. The bare trees protecting the garden on 3 sides were so enmeshed that she could hardly make out the neighbouring houses. Cupping the broad end with her palm, she pushed her fingers into the soil and was sent back with a yelp onto her backside. Propped on her hands, she stared. It had moved. A definite twist, as if nuzzling into the warmth of her skin. On knees and elbows, she watched it for a sign, and then stroked its length. A small but detectable movement, almost a wriggle. "Hello to you too," she said. "What brought you here, I wonder?" Clearing a channel in the soil around its circumference, she began to tease it out. At the slightly narrower end, her fingertips slipped inside a hollow. The result was a powerful jerk, and it shrugged back into the earth. For a second, she had seen the upper portions of 2 black cavities. "Sorry," she whispered, packing dirt against the bone and covering it over with leaves. That night, Abby dreamed of lambs and of wading in earth, of spreading her tubers. She dreamed of a bone tree in the woods, a sapling of femurs and mandibles crying out for her. She tickled its joints and brought lambs to dance around its knees. As she rose from sleep, the cry took over. A keening, the simple call of the newborn. She followed the sound to the spare room and, pushing the desk aside, looked down into the moonlit garden and saw the cold glare of cat's eyes on the fence. The animal jumped down, its attention turned on the tiny, helpless shape rocking in the disturbed pile of leaves. Abby thundered down the stairs and out of the back door. The cat bolted. "Oh, come here, poor thing." It was half out of the ground. The little skull angled blindly into the lawn, trying to right itself with its tiny skeletal arms. Feeling her touch, it allowed her to ease it back into the earth. "There we go," she said, placing the cobweb bones of its hand between her own. The toothless mouth closed over her little finger. A whimper grew urgent and then shrill. It clawed weakly, trying to drag itself out again. Abby hushed it and held it, but the frustration grew worse. "Okay then." She tucked him into the soil and went inside and brought milk, but the inchoate mouth turned away. She fetched bread and chicken. She tried biscuits. She warmed soup, but her tiny charge only cried and gaped for her finger. The cold woke her before dawn. There were leaves in her hair, and the dew had soaked through to her skin. He was snuggled fast asleep in his burrow. It took a moment for her to notice the dark patch across his crown, a sticky film of silver black, and there was more strewn across the leaves. She panicked, ready to dig him out. Then she saw the cat and gaped with relief. Getting up, she stretched her cold muscles and hid what was left of the cat under the pile next to him. Having made a cursory circuit of the house, the letting agent stepped onto the crumbled patio and blew into his hands. "Definitely that time of year again. Anything to report out here?" Abby said there was nothing to report. "I suppose I'll take a 2-minute tour. Ordinarily I wouldn't, but your landlady does insist. To be perfectly honest, I can't tell a begonia from a triffid." By the time he reached the corner by the rhododendron, he had lost interest. "I'll advise you keeping it tidy." He left without saying much more. Abby parted the pile of leaves. "It's okay. He's gone." "Have you seen Smudges?" the woman at the door asked, handing Abby a flyer bearing the picture of a cat. A little girl with a forlorn expression hugged at her hip. Abby recognised them as living a few houses along. "He's been missing for days and we're worried sick." Abby said she hadn't seen him. "I'll certainly keep a lookout. There's talk of cat thieves in the area. Can you believe it? Poor things are disappearing all the time. And if we lost Smudges, well, we'd be heartbroken. If I see anything at all, I will let you know straight away. You're just a few doors along, aren't you? Or I could message you." "No need," said the woman brightly, looking up and down again at Abby's bobble hat and second favourite dressing gown. "I've put our email on the poster." She was already leading the little girl down the drive. "Thank you." "Okay," said Abby. Back in the kitchen, she drank soup at the cooker to take in the hob's warmth. The cat, inside the cat carrier, watched her rip lumps of bread and scoop up the last of the hot mush from the pan. "Don't get jealous," she said, tapping a tin of cat food. "You'll have yours when it's time." It was only fair to ensure they were fed too. The keening struck up at the sound of the back door. "Here we are," Abby said, labouring across the lawn as the trapped animal began to panic. "Hungry boy?" The leaves stirred as he answered her. That soft musical sound had grown stronger. He had turned in the soil and lay on his side. "Hush now." She placed the carrier next to him and pulled her Christmas hoodie over her legs as she sat down on it and unlatched the gate. An arm, partly fleshed, whipped up, and the fight began. Abby nibbled a biscuit and looked up at the protecting trees and waited for the thumping and rocking to end. There was the shush of leaves as he crawled back into his bed. While the crunching and gobbling went on, Abby counted stars. There must be an app that teaches you the constellations. With a jingle, the cat's collar landed by her feet. She giggled. You really are a disgusting boy at times. He made a long, wet burp. Come here, you. She knelt and ran the backs of her fingers across the sinews of his jaw. Growing so fast. What are we going to do with you, eh? A tarry-furred limb was clutched to his sternum. Saving it for brekkie, are you? Now, I want you to settle down tonight, okay? I've got lots and lots to do tomorrow. The flesh of his hand squeezed hers and put it to the moist muscle of what was becoming his mouth. Oh, you are such a darling. Now let me tuck you in. He cuddled his cat's leg, and she covered him over for the night. That shouldn't be a problem. Let me take a look-see. Abby's boss hummed tunelessly while he checked the holiday rota. She rubbed her eyes and peered over the windowsill at the long mound of compost. His sleep had been disturbed of late. He was hungry. I'm sorry, darling, she had whispered, rocking him gently. We're running out of cats. But don't you worry. We will sort it out. I promise. A boss came back to the phone. Okay, Abby, I can't swing it for today. But tomorrow is okay. Was it a week you wanted? 2, if that's all right. Yeah, this time of year it's not really a big deal. It's a summer they all want time off. Going anywhere nice? Oh, just sort of travelling around, really. Cool, he said, and asked no more. I've bought a moped, said Abby. Oh, right. Well, enjoy your moped, Abby, and I guess we'll see you back in a fortnight. In her out-of-the-house clothes, Abby packed sandwiches, a loaf, and a thick pair of work gloves. She pulled on the yellow and pink crash helmet and buzzed to a quiet spot by the river. Tempting the ducks with bread was easy, but it took 3 frantic battles to score a victory. Dropping the bird into the storage compartment under the moped's seat, her breathless triumph was cut short by the elderly couple scowling at her from a path. In the town, she could find no spot to attract seagulls that was free of witnesses or CCTV. The only other find was a badger she scraped up from the verge of a country road. 3 cars veered round her, the passengers pop-eyed with revulsion. Clueless as to what to do, she hovered outside a butcher's shop and decided against it. He would only eat the freshest food. As the day dwindled, Abby carried her dismal catch in a bin bag through the house to the crumbled patio. The badger stank. As for the duck, might feathers be dangerous? He could choke, and that's if he could eat them at all. She felt tired and dirty and out of ideas. To her joy and relief, he wolfed every scrap without a grumble. This was progress. Well done, darling. Aren't you growing up, eh? She snuggled down into the soil. Only for a little while, okay? You wouldn't believe the day I've had. Good job I'm fabulous, isn't it? He was fully muscled and already taller than her. He licked a finger and wiped specks of dirt from his lidless eyes. His head on her shoulder, they lay under the open sky, and she told him all about the stars. He was hungry, she could tell, but he didn't grumble. Don't you worry, darling. I've had an idea. Tomorrow, it's going to be all right. Then, after a moment, she said, What will you do when you're finished? You won't need me anymore. He cupped her cheek and kissed her. A huge 4x4 occupied the driveway. You're very smart looking, the landlady said as Abby showed her in. I like it. Abby was dressed in clothes from the far side of the wardrobe. Smart jeans and a cream jumper. No hat. Tea? Coffee? Abby asked. Why not? Tea would be lovely. Milk, 1 sugar. Thank you, said the landlady, doing her best not to appear cold, despite her expensive coat. She went to the kitchen window. Energy prices, said Abby plainly. Yes, awful, isn't it? I have to say it's unusual to hear from any of my tenants. But then this place isn't quite like the others. Well, said Abby, handing her a mug of tea. Is that it? The older woman pointed a pink nail at the long mound in the garden. Is that why you called me? That? I mean, if you think it's untidy, but it is about the garden. The landlady let out an exasperated breath. Sit down, Abby, please. Abby sat at the table. The landlady remained at the window, her tea held in both hands. I grew up in this house, she said. We were poor, like you are. That fence was a few posts strung with wire. You could slip through and play in the woods all day. Didn't matter then. I could find my way around there in the dark. Mother hated it. She looked at Abby, measuring her. Abby waited. Father, however, loved it. Taught me how to trap rabbits. I kept them as pets. The family joke was I'd been swapped with a child reared by wolves. She smiled a brief, dreamy smile. Her pink nail tapped the rim of the mug. Nothing like you. Abby kept silent, but shifted slightly to one side, closer to the spade leaning against the wall. What have you called him? The question was matter-of-fact. Lammy, said Abby. A nod of acknowledgement. The landlady sat down at the table. Charlie Moss. That's what I called him. My Charlie Moss. Though he was never mine. Not really, not in the end. Father landed a lucky job in Hong Kong. Suddenly there was money, but my mother... Well, life alone with a tomboy tearaway wasn't for her, I suppose. She dwindled. And then one day I found him. A neighbour's dog I used to play with was trying to dig him up. Mother all but collapsed. A baby buried in our garden. And then when he moved... Oh, she laughed a little, eyes closed. It was me who nurtured him. Me who fed him. Has to be raw, doesn't it? Preferably still alive. We had chickens. Mother wouldn't go out and feed them anymore. Not for a while, anyway. Not until she saw what I had. Soon lost her loathing of the woods. She took her first sip of tea and put it down with open distaste. No livestock here, I notice. Did you not think of that? Couldn't afford it, I suppose. Cats, said Abby. Cats? That's one way of doing it. The landlady watched her own hands rubbing the warm mug. Abby, she looked up. If you don't mind, I would very much like to see him. Please. Yes, said Abby. Really? You don't mind? Why should I? There's no need to mind. After all I've said, you were happy for me to go out there. Her gaze was hard and scrutinizing. No persuasion necessary. It's not like I could stop you. The landlady turned her head toward the back door, as if she might glimpse him through it. And for a moment her self-possession slipped. She picked up a bag and cleared her throat. The house appears to be clean and tidy. I can't fault you for that. Which is why that spade is so out of place. All dirty and wet. And there is a shed for it. Abby grabbed the handle and stood up. Don't bother. The woman was scared but stood her ground. Tears came. I'm expected back. People are aware that I'm here. I made sure of it. And what would you do with the car? And all of my DNA floating about? She spat on the floor. Like that, see? Her voice quavered. She gripped the bag. I will be advising the letting agent to give you notice to quit. You should start looking for another place as soon as possible. There is a housing crisis, remember? Don't see me out. The shed door made for a good ramp, and though the moped was heavy, Abby eventually heaved it into the back of the 4x4. Whether the neighbours noticed didn't matter. Behind a dilapidated pub was a perfect spot, remote and a 4-hour round trip. The landlady's clothes and bag and a splash of turpentine were poor kindling, but with patience the upholstery caught, further fuelled by flammable odds and ends from the glove box. Perhaps she was being silly. Surely no one would come looking the very next day. The moped buzzed onto the driveway, home in the early hours, and as he slept in his bed, so she went to hers, and though filled with fear and hope such as she had never experienced, Abby let her clothes drop and slept right through until evening. When she woke up, she couldn't bring herself to go to the window in the back room, in case she was wrong. Instead, she pulled on her favourite dressing gown and stayed in the bathroom until she felt guilty and stupid and willed herself downstairs. She passed through the kitchen as if the blood and upturned furniture were no longer there. Grasping the handle to steady herself, she opened the back door. He was waiting for her. He stood on the lawn, tall and complete, his warm breath hanging in the air. She stepped over the threshold and into the garden, gazing. Her favourite dressing gown fell to the crumbling slabs, and she walked into his arms, and he held her, and she was not cold. The back fence and its tangle of thorns gave way, and they slipped between the trunks of the leaning trees. The end. There we go.
Jim, that's fantastic.
Thank you. That was Lammy, that was called. It's in my back garden, if you can call it a back garden where I live, there was a giant puffball mushroom way down in the rough glass, and it looked like a skull popping up through the ground.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, ooh, there's a good idea.